Hi everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to start our animation process. We're going to create just a super ultra basic walk cycle. I'm going to keep it very generic, just so you can get the basic ideas of how to keyframe your controls and things like that. Feel free to experiment with your own animation by kind of stylizing it a bit more or adding a bit more personality to it. I've got like a sort of a demo video here that I've rendered out just to give you a bit of an idea of sort of the level that we're looking at. As I said, this is going to be quite rough and very generic, so this is sort of just to give you a basic idea. I've added in a little footstep sound, and the way that I did that was I took an aluminium can that had been kind of squashed, and I just flexed the can a little bit, sort of bending it. So as I did that back and forth, it was creating this kind of clicking, kind of tapping noise, which you can hear there. So I've just basically had the animation playing and then recorded that aluminium can sound in time with the footsteps. And then I've combined the animation and the audio in After Effects and just rendered that out as this video. So you can do something like that if you want. If you want to play around with that, you can, but it's certainly not required. I've also just stuck a couple of little eyeballs on the front of my character. Once again, you don't need to do that either. It was just something I did just in a bit of spare time that I had. All I've done there is just created a couple of small spheres and kind of squashed them and stretched them a little bit to form sort of flat little oval discs. And I've parented them onto the body joint in the middle of the can, sort of around about this location. So yeah, they're just parented onto that joint, and I've just used the move tool and positioned them into place like that so that they move along with the can body. Once again, that's an optional thing. You can play around with that if you want, but by all means, it's not a requirement. So we're going to go through the process of creating just a super basic, ultra simple walk cycle. Okay, so you can see here I've got my rig file. I've color coded these. You'll see that process in an optional video. So once again, you can color code your handles the way I have if you want. You don't have to do that. Okay, it makes it a bit more easy for you guys to see on these videos when they are colored though, which is why I sort of wanted to do it. All right, so currently I've got my rig master file open, so that's basically got all of my rig. I've turned the visibility of most things off in the viewport, and I'm talking about things that are actually in the scene, so things like the joints, the IK handles, deformers and texture placement. So all I can see is NURBS curves and polygons. Those are really the only things visible in the scene at the moment. Okay, so I'm not going to animate inside my rig master file, and that's so if I need to, I can always go back to this file and use a copy of it if I kind of mess things up too drastically. So what I'm going to do before I start any kind of animation is I'm going to save this file. So I'm going to go into the file menu, and I'm going to go to save scene as, and I'm just going to change it to you know, you can just change it to can animation or something like that. I'm just going to call it can anim 001 just there, and I'm going to save that. Okay, now I want to set my frame rate for this animation to 25 frames per second. So I'm going to pop down to my settings here, and you can see at the moment the playback speed's at 24 frames per second just here. So I'm going to pop up to the settings menu just here, and I'm going to set the time to 25 frames per second. It doesn't necessarily matter what you set this to, but I just like using 25 as it's nice and easy to calculate how many seconds I've got in my timeline. Back down under, where were we before? I'm going to go down to the undo tab just here, make sure you've got your render queue, or your undo queue I should say, set to infinite. And under the time slider options just here, I want to go to playback, update view, active, change it from active to all, just here. Okay, what that'll do is, if you've got multiple viewports open, which we probably will do at some point, when you press the play button down here, it'll actually play your animation in all of your viewports instead of just the one that's active. Alright, so that makes it a lot easier to see what you're doing. Okay, everything else is probably going to be fine as it is. So I'm just going to hit save. Okay, and we're almost ready to begin animating. We do need to make some adjustments to our timeline. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to this number here, and I'm going to type in, let's type in -1 for this. Okay, and then what I can do is drag the indicator back to -1. I'm going to explain why I'm doing this in a minute. The next thing I want to do is change this last number here to 33, like that. Okay. So the way that I'm going to set this up is we're going to actually render from frame 1 through to frame 32 approximately, and our mid frame is going to be frame 17, just here. So the character will take one step with one of its feet between frame 1 and frame 17. Okay, so that's like one cycle. Alright, it will then basically return back to its initial frame 1 position at frame 33. Alright, so if we start off with the left foot forward on frame 1, by 17 the left foot's going to be back and the right foot is going to be forward. So basically the legs will pass one another, okay, somewhere in here, and end up sort of forwards and backwards on 17. It'll then do the same thing the other way. Okay, so the feet will pass one another here on about 25 and then end up back in their original starting position on 33. So essentially what we're getting in this space of time is basically a sort of a two-step type setup. Alright. Now the reason that I want a couple of frames up here to begin with is I want to set a keyframe on all my control handles on in this position on frame -1, and what that'll do is give us a sort of a reset point. Okay, I'm then going to set just another additional keyframe on frame 0, and then I'm going to start animating on frame 1. Now the frame on frame 0, what this does is it holds the position from frame 1 for 2 frames, so here and here. And if I'm using motion blur on my character, this frame on frame 0 will stop the motion blur from not working properly. Okay, if we go from this position to frame 1, sometimes the motion blur will kind of take this position into account for the blur, where we don't actually want that to occur. So having a static frame just here will basically cause no real motion blur necessarily sort of before the sequence starts. Okay, so let's just create that pair of keyframes. So I'm going to go to -1. I'm going to hold down the shift key, and I'm just going to select all of my handles one after the other. So each of the knee handles, okay, each of the body handles, and each of the arm handles. Like this. I'm then going to click and drag down in the channel box, okay, and you can highlight all the translates and rotates, and then right click and hit key selected. Okay. Another way to kind of do a similar thing is to press S on the keyboard, and that's going to set key. Okay, now that will set a key for everything that's not locked. You can see that the scale and visibility is locked, and it is not keyframing those. Keep in mind, this is sort of different for all of the handles. Some of them are just rotate, some are translate and rotate, some just rotate, and so on and so forth. The interesting one is actually the feet controls, because we've actually got these custom controls just here. So you can either just hit S and keyframe everything, or you can select translates and rotates. In that situation, it won't keyframe these. All right. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing over here on frame 0, so I'm just going to press S on that one as well. Okay, so what that's doing basically is keeping a static or a level animation curve in our graph editor. I'll just turn that on so you can see what I mean. If I hit A, see how we've got this straight line here. All right. What that means is there's 0 movement in between frame -1 and 0. Okay, and that should hopefully reduce any kind of weird motion blur if we use motion blur on our camera at some point for rendering this. Okay, so once we've sort of done that, what we can do is go to frame 1, and just here I'm going to type 1, so that's just +1, like that, and I'm going to type in 1 just here as well. And all that's doing is basically setting up our timeline so that we have basically just frame 1 to frame 33 active. The 2 keyframes we've already made are active. They're actually still there, but we can't see them on the timeline because they're hanging off this end. Okay, so that's basically our scene set up and ready to start animating. I'm going to save this file, so I'll just hit the save button. Okay, and the next time I save this, I'm going to save it as a new version number, so if needs be I can always come back to this one as a basic master animation file, and I can start from scratch in this file. Okay, I'll leave this video here, and in the next one we will start with posing our characters. I'm going to start with the legs, so that'll be in the next video.